I'd like to verify this identity. Now, both sides of this equation, to me, they both look like they have about the same complexity. Secant and tangent are, those functions themselves are a little bit more complicated than sine and cosine. But then on the right side, I've got this fraction. And so they kind of seem like the same complexity to me. So I can start with either side here to verify this identity. I'm actually, for the sake of this example, I'm actually going to do two approaches. Okay, I'm going to start with each side of the equation. So for my first one, I'm just going to start with the left side of the equation, secant of x minus tangent of x. And I want to work my way from this to the 1 minus sine of x over cosine of x. Now this, when I look at this, I don't really see any possible way to factor it. I don't have any, I don't see any identities that I already know. Like I know that there are relationships between secant squared and tangent squared, but I don't have squares here. I don't have any operations that need to happen. So it kind of feels like I'm at a kind of a standstill here. But one really useful option is always to write our trigonometric functions in terms of sine and cosine. And actually keeping my goal in mind, it makes sense to do that because I see sine and cosine. So it makes sense to write these in terms of sine and cosine. So secant of x is 1 over the cosine of x. Okay. And then tangent of x is sine of x over cosine of x. And now I see, okay, now I have fractions. And they're being subtracted. So I can actually perform that operation. And they already have a common denominator. So I can combine the numerator, 1 minus sine of x. And then that's over my common denominator of cosine of x. And that's what I'm looking for. I'm done. Okay, I've verified that identity. Now suppose I had started with the right side, and having now done this verification already, it may be quite obvious what to do here. However, if it's not obvious, that's okay. We're going to go through and walk through this. I've got this fraction here, and again, I don't really have any identities that I see here that I can use. I don't see any ways to factor this. However, I do have an operation happening that I might be able to do, and that operation is that I'm taking this thing and actually dividing by cosine of x, and I can take this subtraction and I could split it across into two different fractions. So I can write this as 1 over cosine of x and then minus sine of x over cosine of x. Okay, so just by actually doing this subtraction over that denominator, I now have this form. And then from here, I recognize a couple of identities. 1 over cosine of x, I have a reciprocal identity that tells me that that is secant of x. And sine of x over cosine of x, that's another identity. That's equal to tangent of x. And of course, you'll recognize that this process that I did was really just the opposite direction of what I did over here. And that's very often the case with identities. It might be just as easy to do both directions, to do either direction as it is the other one. But often there's one that's a little bit more obvious. Always you can start with one side and get to the other side. It doesn't matter which side you start with as far as the possibility. It's just going to be which direction is easier to see.